It's just interesting to hear you say that the point at the time of mass immigration was to build the place up. Clearly, the point of it now is to tear the place down.
Yeah, and isn't that interesting how, it's like, I think the psychologist Carl Jung said something like inequality in excess becomes its opposite.
Yes,
and
that's exactly right.
And it definitely, that applies to inclusivity or openness. Anyway, I was saying that, like, in the United States, because of that experience of just constant demographic turmoil, as soon as the Great Migration petered out in literally the early 60s, we passed the Hart-Celler Immigration Act and opened up the floodgates to the third world. And that's the world that we're in now, right? So it has just been an unending wave after wave after wave of your neighbors, the people you have to negotiate politically and a social collective identity with, are changing all the time. And that's just sort of, it's built into the American understanding of themselves and how societies work and all of that. Like, I would say that there's only maybe the only time the United States, like, really, at least maybe like you could say right after the revolution, but like the period like from 1941, right around that era, that time up to maybe the mid 50s, when the Great Migration started to drive all of the European ethnics out of the cities into the suburbs and stuff. Like, there was that period where we almost pulled it off. We almost pulled off constructing a solid and sustainable national identity that, obviously the fly in the ointment ended up being that there was 10% of the population who weren't really included in that, the African-American population. And that became the sort of, the wedge that allowed people to pry apart that project in the 1960s.
And thank you for acknowledging that was the point of the exercise.
Right. And which, again, not to diminish, especially after going through, the Jonestown series and spending so much time reading about the history of African Americans in the country. And I grew up around in African American neighborhoods mostly, right, and around different places. I'm more sympathetic than most people who are as far right on a lot of political issues as I am to the plight of people who live in the ghetto. I mean,
I couldn't agree more. No, but that's kind of the point that I'm making. If the point of the civil rights movement was to uplift Black people, which I would be completely for, then Selma, Alabama would be a great place. And so would Jackson, Mississippi. And so would Little Rock, Arkansas, and all the kind of holy sites of that period. And in fact, they're all far worse than they were in 1960. So like, what was the point of that? Clearly, if the point of BLM was to help Black people, again, I could kind of be for that. But
I mean, the point of it, so there's two elements. There's two answers to that question, really, right? One is there are people out there who absolutely saw it as a wedge issue to spark revolution in one sense or another, disintegration of the country. You saw this in the 1960s. Tom Wolfe's written about it, but a lot of people have written about how, you remember back in 2008, how when Obama started to rise to prominence and a lot of the older Republicans were throwing out, he's a community organizer, none of the younger people, that just didn't land with younger people at all because they had no frame of reference for the 60s and 70s and stuff. They didn't know what that meant. That you literally had these vast government programs who were just handing out money to revolutionary organizations, the people who were going out and planning and organizing riots at City Hall.
Oh, 100%.
Right? Like that happened in New York, like a group who was not like they got some funding through 3 different kind of, degrees of separation from some government program. They were literally just basically an agency of the New York City government. They were literally just fully funded. Their leaders were appointed.
Well, they're paying for all the street gangs.
And that too. And this group went and held a protest at City Hall, invaded City Hall, trashed the place and everything. And this is a government-funded organization. So that's what people had in mind. And it didn't land with the younger people I noticed back then. So you have those people. You have the people who at Columbia in the 1960s who wrote all the papers that led New York and then other places to, to embrace busing at schools and to embrace expansion of the welfare, programs. And they were very open about, it's really crazy how these 2 professors at Columbia who were sort of the expansion of welfare in New York under James Lindsay was kind of their brainchild. They wrote the paper and the articles about it and everything. And they were brought in as consultants once the decision was made. They're literally writing in their papers, if anybody at City Hall had cared to read them, they weren't saying this is going to make poor people less poor. In fact, they directly say what this is going to do is it's going to increase tension between the lower classes and the middle class. It's going to drive a wedge because there's going to be like an unavoidable racial angle to this, because it's going to be transferring resources from the European ethnic groups in the city over to African Americans and Puerto Ricans. And this is all good because this is going to start to create that tension that we need. It even says,
They said that out loud?
yes. They wrote about it in a I can't remember which magazine it was at this point, but it was like The Atlantic or something. It was like that prominent magazine. It was like a summary of their academic findings, right? And these are the guys who, they were the impetus for the expansion of the welfare programs in New York. They were brought into City Hall to like explain how to implement it and stuff. They even say that a positive benefit of this is it's going to make all of these people more dependent on the government. It's going to make them where they're. So, I mean, you have that angle of it, right? You have that side of things in those people who they know what they're doing and they want to tear this down. I think that in a lot of ways, they're the drivers of a lot of it. But a lot of people are the ones being led, a lot of them, it's just a lot of white people who use it to feel good about themselves.
And
they don't have.
I know them all, yeah.
They're able to insulate themselves from the consequences of their decisions in a way that, and this is, again, to take it international again, you go over to Europe, it's kind of what's gone on is, if you're the leader of Hungary, like Viktor Orban right now, like you're the leader of Hungary. If you're the leader of like Germany, if you're the leader of Great Britain, yeah, like we're still at the point where like you still, not in England, we're not, but like where you still have to be German to like get elected. We can't like take it so far yet that we've detached it completely from like some illusion of the fact that this is a nation state that's self-governing. But really, this is an international superclass, that they identify much more laterally with people of their own class across borders than they do with the people in their own countries. And, that mentality is what makes it possible for them to do the things that they're doing to the people that they have power over.
So what, at this point, you describe what's happening to Europe as the worst thing, not just the UK, but maybe especially the UK, but also Germany, Spain, Ireland, as you noticed, really everything west of Central Europe, of Hungary, is increasingly not European. So what, does that trend continue or stop, or what happens?
Wow. I mean, that's going to be up to the Europeans. I say this with not without pride at all, but I think that as long as the United States remains the dominant power in the world and the dominant power in European geopolitics, and in a lot of places like Germany, still a significant factor in their domestic politics, I think that we are a very negative influence on that front.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting to watch a ghoul like Anne Applebaum become literally hysterical, like shaking with rage in the way that people with no self-control do, when Viktor Orban says stuff like, well, I just don't want to admit like 1 million non-Hungarians into my country.
Yeah.
And they go crazy.
Yeah. I mean, you look at how they respond to somebody like Orban, and like they would color revolution that dude in a second if they thought they could get away with it. If they didn't think it was.
I know Orban well. He's hardly like a right-wing crazy. He's like very moderate and kind of like liberal in an 80s way.
I think that's probably the only reason they don't try it, is they know that like his chief opposition is far to the right of him. So that's probably why they don't do it.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. We hope you'll subscribe to it. And by the way, you can hit the little bell on there and get notifications every time we produce a video. We hope you'll do that also.